should be nothing here. Look at the map, and what you find is not land. It is a lagoon, a shallow, muddy, brackish stretch of water and marsh at the top of the Adriatic Sea. The kind of place where the ground is not really ground at all. Mudflats, salt marsh, water that is too shallow to sail and too wet to walk on. A place fit for birds and fishermen and nothing else. No stone, no fresh water, no farmland. Nowhere in the entire lagoon to build anything. And on that non-place, people built one of the most beautiful cities the world has ever seen. They built it, quite literally, upside down. They drove millions of wooden poles down into the mud, whole forests of oak and alder and larch, hammered end first into the seabed until they hit the firm clay beneath, and then they laid stone platforms on top of the submerged trees, and on those platforms they raised palaces, marble palaces, golden basilicas, a city of stone floating on a forest of drowned wood, standing in the sea. And from that impossible city, they went out and took the world. For 1,000 years, this republic, this town on a swamp, became one of the greatest maritime powers in history. Ran the trade of the entire Mediterranean. It grew so rich that a single one of its merchant families could bankroll a king. It commanded a navy that broke empires. It built, in its shipyards, the most advanced factory on Earth, capable of assembling an entire warship in a single day, centuries before the Industrial Revolution. This little city, standing on stilts in a swamp, controlled the crossroads between Europe and the East, and made itself the richest place on the continent doing it. They called it, without a shred of irony, the most serene republic, and it lasted, independent and unconquered, for over 1,000 years, longer than almost any state in European history. So here is a city that took a lagoon of mud and stole from the sea a place to stand, and out of it built an empire and one of the wonders of the world. And here is the same city, right now, giving all of it back, sinking, flooding, and emptying, with fewer than 50,000 people left living in it, while 30 million visitors a year pour through its streets to photograph the beauty its own citizens can no longer afford to live inside. Both of those things are true at the same time. Neither one is an exaggeration. The question this city asks is one that is going to matter more and more, everywhere. What happens when a place becomes so beloved, so photographed, so visited, that the people who made it what it is can no longer live there? Can a city survive being loved to death? And what does it mean to watch the most beautiful place in the world turn, slowly, into a museum of itself? This is Venice. To understand why anyone would build a city in a swamp, you have to understand that they did not do it for the beauty. They did it out of terror. In the 5th and 6th centuries, the Roman world was collapsing. Wave after wave of invaders swept down into Italy, Goths, and then, most terrifyingly, the Huns under Attila, burning cities as they came. And the people of the wealthy Roman towns on the mainland fled. They ran for the one place the horsemen could not follow them: the water. They ran out into the lagoon, onto the sandbars and mudflats, and they discovered something. Horses cannot charge across a marsh. Armies cannot besiege what they cannot reach. The lagoon was too shallow for warships to enter, and too wet for cavalry to cross, and only the locals knew the deep channels that wound through it. The very uselessness of the place was its perfect defense. The refugees stayed, and their descendants never left. That is the founding fact of Venice, and it explains everything that follows. This city was not built on a river crossing like London, or a harbor like Havana, or a sacred hill. It was built in the one place nobody else wanted, by people who had nowhere else to go. And because the water protected them so completely, they grew, over the centuries, into something no other Italian city managed to be: free. Never conquered, never ruled by a foreign king. While the rest of Europe was carved up by emperors and popes and warlords, Venice, standing in its puddle, simply governed itself for 1,000 years. But a city with no land has a problem. It cannot grow food. It cannot quarry stone. It has almost no fresh water. Everything, every meal, every brick, every drop to drink has to come from somewhere else. Which means Venice had only one possible destiny. It had to trade, or it had to die. So it traded. And then it did rather more than trade. Venice sat in the perfect spot, at the top of the Adriatic, the gateway between Europe and the East, and Venetian merchants pushed out along the sea routes to Constantinople, to Egypt, to the ports of the Levant, and came back loaded with the goods of Asia: silk, spices, pepper, sugar, glass, gems. In an age when pepper was worth its weight in silver, Venice controlled the pipeline. The wealth that flooded back into the lagoon was almost unimaginable. The Venetians turned that wealth into machinery. Their great state shipyard, the Arsenale, became the largest industrial complex in the world. A vast walled compound where, at its height, some 16,000 workers built warships on what was effectively an assembly line, 3 centuries before Henry Ford. Hulls moved down a channel past stations where each team fitted its own part: frigging here, weapons there, oars, sails, and out the other end came a finished galley. Full stretch. They could turn out a complete warship in a single day. It astonished every foreign visitor who saw it, and it is why this little city could suddenly put a fleet on the water faster than any kingdom on earth. With that fleet, Venice built an empire, not of land, but of ports, a string of islands and harbors and fortresses down the Adriatic and across the Aegean, controlling the trade routes like a hand closing around a throat. And it governed itself in a way no other state did. Venice had no king. It had a doge, a ruler elected for life, but hemmed in by so many councils, committees, and rules that he was closer to a ceremonial prisoner than a monarch, forbidden to open his own mail unwitnessed or to meet foreign envoys alone. The elaborate system that chose him involved rounds of lotteries and votes, so convoluted that no faction could rig it. Beneath him sat the great councils of the merchant nobility, and beside them, in the shadows, the Council of 10, a small, secret, feared body that handled the security of the state and to which any citizen could denounce another by slipping an anonymous note into the mouth of a stone lion's head set into the palace wall. Venice was not a democracy. It was something stranger, a republic of merchants, brilliantly engineered to make sure that no single man could ever seize it, and utterly ruthless with anyone who tried. It worked. For 1100 years, while kings rose and fell across Europe, while dynasties burned, the most serene republic simply carried on, unconquered, doing business. And then, in 1204, it did something that has never been forgotten. A Crusade army heading for the Holy Land arrived in Venice, unable to pay for the fleet it had ordered. The blind, ancient Doge of Venice, the ruler, a man in his 90s, made them a deal. and the deal ended with the Crusaders, ferried by Venetian ships, turning aside from their holy war and sacking Constantinople itself. The greatest Christian city on earth, the very city we stood in a few films ago, looted by fellow Christians in an orgy of destruction it never fully recovered from. Venice took its cut in treasure and territory and hauled home, among other things, 4 ancient bronze horses that had stood in Constantinople for centuries and mounted them above the doors of its own basilica, where copies still stand today. That is Venice in one story. Brilliant, ruthless, commercial to its bones, and entirely willing to break the world open if there was profit in the crack. The prophet built a city that does not look like anywhere else on earth. Because Venice, having grown fabulously rich on the trade with the East, built itself in the image of both worlds at once. Look at the Basilica of St. Mark. It does not look like a Western European church at all. It looks Byzantine, domes, and glittering gold mosaics covering acre after acre of ceiling, more Constantinople than Rome. Look at the Doge's palace beside it. Pink and white stone in delicate patterns, arcades and pointed arches that owe as much to the Islamic world as to Gothic Europe. Venice was the hinge between East and West, and it built itself out of both into something that belongs to neither. And it built it all on water. There are no streets in the old city, there are canals, and there are alleys so narrow you can touch both walls. The Grand Canal wings through the heart of it in a great reversed S, lined with the palaces of merchant princes, their facades opening directly onto the water, their front doors reachable only by boat. There are over 400 bridges. There are no cars, and have never been. Every single thing that enters this city, the groceries, the mail, the furniture, the ambulances, the dead on their way to the cemetery island, moves by boat or on foot. The Venetians even made their industry beautiful. On the island of Murano, they perfected glassmaking to a standard no one in Europe could match. Glass so clear, so fine, so impossibly thin that rivals could not begin to copy it. The Republic moved all the furnaces out to that island, officially to stop the city burning down, but also to keep the secret in one place. And it guarded that secret so jealously that the glass blowers were forbidden, on pain of death, to leave the Republic and take their knowledge elsewhere. A master glassmaker of Murano was a prisoner of his own genius, showered with privileges and quietly watched. Venice invented mirrors as we know them, and grew rich selling Europe its own reflection. It made the finest lace. On the island of Burano, where the houses are still painted in wild, vivid colors, so that fishermen could pick out their own home through the lagoon fog. It made the finest paper and ran the greatest printing presses in Europe. And in the Carnival, the city produced perhaps its most famous invention of all. For weeks each year, Venice dissolved itself. Behind identical white masks, the blank, beaked, expressionless faces you still see in every shop window. Nobles and servants and priests and foreigners moved through the same streets, unknowable and unaccountable. Rank vanished. Debts and dignity and marriage vows became, for a season, negotiable. A city built on rigid hierarchy and ruthless commerce invented, once a year, the total anonymity of everyone, and then, on the last night, took off the masks and went back to business. It is hard to think of a more Venetian idea. Even freedom here was a beautifully designed system with a fixed closing date. And then the world moved and left Venice behind. The end came not from an army, but from a map. In the years around 1500, Portuguese ships found their way around Africa to India, and suddenly the spices of the East could come to Europe by sea, directly, without ever passing through the Mediterranean. Pipeline Venice had controlled for centuries was simply bypassed. The same thing, exactly, that killed the Silk Road and buried Samarkand. The ships found another way, and the great middlemen of the old routes were left holding a road that no longer led anywhere. Venice declined slowly, gracefully, over 300 years, becoming, in its long twilight, less a power than a pleasure. It turned into the party capital of Europe, a city of gambling houses and carnival and famous courtesans, where the aristocracy of the whole continent came to misbehave behind masks. And then, in 1797, a young French general named Napoleon marched into northern Italy, and the 1,000-year republic, never once conquered in its entire history, surrendered without a fight. The last doge took off his cap and handed it to his servant, and said that he would not be needing it again. The most serene republic, after 1,100 years, was over. The thing that will finally kill Venice was never an army. Hold that thought, because it is coming and it is rising. First, though, look at the lagoon itself, because for all its palaces, this is a place where the wild and the human have been tangled together from the beginning. The lagoon is a living thing. It is one of the great wetlands of the Mediterranean, a shifting mosaic of salt marsh, mudflat, sandbank and channel, and it breathes. Twice a day, the tide pushes in through the inlets and floods the whole system, and twice a day it drains out again, flushing the lagoon clean, carrying away the waste of the city. Tidal breathing is the only reason a city of this size could survive here for a millennium without drowning in its own filth. The lagoon has always been Venice's moat, its larder, and its lungs, and it is full of birds. Flamingos wade in the shallows in flocks of pink. Herons and egrets stalk the mudflats. Vast numbers of migratory birds use these wetlands as a staging post, resting here on their journeys between Africa and northern Europe. The fishermen still work the lagoon as they have for centuries, and the marshes still shelter fish and shellfish and the strange, delicate ecology of brackish water. But the emblem of Venice is not a wild animal. It is a stone one, and it stands everywhere, on the flag, over the gates, on top of the great column in the square. A winged lion with a paw resting on an open book. The Lion of St. Mark, the symbol of the Republic. And there is a detail in it that tells you everything about this city's character. When Venice was at peace, the lion was carved with the book held open, showing words of peace. When Venice was at war, the book in the lion's paw was shown closed. The whole personality of the most serene republic is in that, a lion. Yes, but a lion holding a book, power and commerce, force and contract, the sword and the ledger, always together, always watching the water. Which brings us, at last, to the water and to Venice now. Everyone knows Venice is sinking. What most people do not realize is that this is only half the problem, and the smaller half. The city is subsiding, slowly settling into its mud, partly through natural compaction, partly because, in the 20th century, industry pumped groundwater out from under the lagoon, and the whole city sagged. The far greater problem is that the sea is coming up to meet it. sea levels are rising, and the floods that Venetians call acqua alta, high water, when the tide surges over the quays and pours into the streets and squares, have grown steadily more frequent and more destructive. In 2019, the water rose so high it inundated the city catastrophically, flooding St. Mark's Basilica itself and the crypt beneath it, ruining shops and homes and hearts. So Venice built a wall against the sea. Its name is Mose, and it is one of the largest engineering projects in Europe. 78 enormous hinged steel gates, lying flat on the seabed at the 3 inlets of the lagoon, fill with air and rise up to seal the lagoon off from the Adriatic when a dangerous tide is coming. It works. Since it came into operation, it has held back flood after flood, saved the city more than 100 times. But here is the trouble. Mose was designed to be raised a handful of times a year, and it is now raised dozens of times a year, and rising seas mean it will be needed more and more. Every closure costs a fortune, cuts the port off from the sea, and, most dangerously, stops the lagoon from breathing, blocking the tidal flush that has kept these waters alive for 1,000 years. The barrier that saves the city may, in the end, suffocate the lagoon that made the city possible, and no one seriously believes Mose can hold out against the sea levels forecast for the coming century. It does not solve the problem. It buys time. And while Venice fights the water, something quieter is happening. And it is what will really end this city. The people are leaving. Not fleeing a flood, just leaving, quietly, one family at a time, because it has become impossible to live here. Around 30 million visitors come to Venice every year. Around 50,000 people actually live in the historic city, down from well over 150,000 in the middle of the last century, and still falling every year. There are now, by most counts, more tourist beds in Venice than there are Venetians. The math of that is brutal, and it plays out in the smallest details of daily life. Homes have been converted en masse into holiday rentals, so a young Venetian family cannot find or afford an apartment. The shops that sold ordinary things, the greengrocer, the hardware store, the toy shop have been priced out and replaced by mask shops and gelato counters and souvenir stalls, because a tourist will pay more for a trinket than a neighbor will for a screwdriver. There are almost no jobs outside of tourism. Schools close for lack of children. The campi, the neighborhood squares that were the heart of Venetian life, where children played football and old men argued, stand quiet. In parts of the city, you can walk for a long while and not hear Italian spoken, let alone the old Venetian dialect. The city has fought back with what tools it has. It banned the giant cruise ships from the lagoon, whose wakes were eroding the foundations and whose passengers left little behind. And in a step no other city had taken, Venice began charging an entry fee simply to walk into the historic center on the busiest days, a few euros, a ticket to enter a living city, as though it were a museum or a theme park. The fee has raised money. It has not noticeably slowed the crowds. Roughly 9 in 10 visitors are day trippers who arrive in the morning, walk the same 3 landmarks, buy a souvenir, and leave by evening, using the city's water and streets and patience, and leaving almost nothing behind but their footprints. There is a word Venetians use for what is happening, and it is not sinking, It is emptying, and we have stood in this exact place before, twice on this channel. In Kyoto, we watched a city saved from destruction because it was too beautiful to burn, and then slowly crushed by the millions who came to adore that beauty, until the residents put up signs begging to be treated as people and not as scenery. And in Havana, we watched grand apartments go dark on the seafront, not because the buildings had failed, but because the people had gone. 3 cities, 3 different reasons: poverty, adoration, and the market, and the same terrible ending. A beautiful shell, still standing, with the life drained out of it. Seems there are many different ways to lose a city, and only one of them involves the buildings falling down. Venice's stones may well be saved. The lion may still hold his book. The question is whether there will be any Venetians left inside to see it. So take a boat out into the lagoon at dusk and look back at the city from the water, the way the first refugees must have looked at their empty mudflats 1,500 years ago. The domes and campaniles are gold in the last light. The tide is coming in, breathing through the inlets exactly as it has for millennia, unless tonight the great gates are up. Beneath the water, under every palace, the drowned forest still stands. Million of wooden piles, hammered into the mud by hands that turned to dust 1,000 years ago, holding up the most beautiful city on earth, in a place where there was never any ground at all. None of it is decided. The barriers may hold for another 50 years, or the sea may rise past everything they were built to stop. The entry fees and the cruise bans may slow the flood of visitors, or Venice may become what it is already halfway to being: an exquisite, perfectly preserved stage set, staffed by commuters from the mainland, visited by millions, inhabited by no one. For the city may find, as it always found in its 1,000 impossible years, some new way to trade with the world without being consumed by it. Nobody knows. What endures for now is what was always here: the lagoon, breathing twice a day, the forest of trees standing in the dark beneath the stone, the lion with his book watching the water, and a city that once took a swamp that was worth nothing to anybody, and turned it, by sheer stubbornness and nerve, into the wonder of the world, and is now trying, against the sea and against its own beauty, to remain a place where someone can actually live. Take a breath. Stay a while. The tide will come into the lagoon, whether anyone is left to watch it or not. This has been Where on Earth. Thank you for watching, and until the next journey.